think we're live. Wonderful. In theory, we're live anyway. Who can say what's real and what's not?
We'll just talk to each other for an hour.
Yeah,
I think we're live now.
How are you doing, Devoki? How's life?
It's good. It's good. I am now back in the US. I'm in Texas, and so now I feel like I don't remember how to handle like nice weather. Like my shift from like Norway and New York weather to all of a sudden being in Texas weather, I'm like, I don't know how to dress anymore. Like, I don't understand. Temperatures. I brought a pair of boots, and my husband was like, "You don't need boots," and I'm like, "I need boots.
I need boots.
I don't know what.
It's January. I need boots."
Yeah. Besides, I feel like cowboy boots are a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't bring cowboy boots, but I feel like if they're a thing, then I'm fine.
They're a thing. So
yeah.
What
it's
an
the culture here.
What an incredible way to answer how you're doing for this book club.
It's true. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to January, our first nonfiction book club of 2023. I am Nicole Sweeney. This is my YouTube channel. That's it.
Yeah. I'm Devoki. And this is not my YouTube channel, but other months it is on my YouTube channel.
Yep. Every month we meet and we talk about a book. We take turns picking books. I tend to pick social sciencey books. Devoki tends to pick hard sciencey books, but none of this means anything anymore. That used to be the thing.
Yeah.
Back in the beginning. But anyway.
Yeah, we really just like pick books that that sound interesting or that have been like on our TBR for a while.
It's just, is this a nonfiction book? If so, we might pick it. But this month we are talking about Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sofi Thanhauser. Thanhauser? I should have confirmed that before I began, but I did not. I apologize to Sophie. This book we say this every month, but the great thing about Nonfiction Book Club is that nonfiction books tend to just like, it's what is this book about? It's on the cover. It tells you. It's very straightforward what the book is about. I guess in this case we can be a little bit more specific. So this is a like very far-reaching, like global history book told through the lens of a specific item. This is like a whole genre of book. Like this is of like history books, but that you use an object as the lens through which to tell a history lesson, which I think this book was more of that than I thought it would be. Like it is more the big history lesson. I think I was expecting it to be more on like the clothing. Like I expected it to be more specific to the object and less broad than it turned out to be. That's not necessarily a criticism. That is just like my own expectations were a little bit different. And so anyway, so she's talking about more about the history of fabrics than like clothing but like fabric more than like styles or like trends like that, but like trends to the degree like cultural trends are usually being she's concentrating on the fabrics as like the lens for viewing that. So she has 2 chapters on linen, 3 chapters on cotton, 3 more on silk, 3 on synthetics, and then 3 on wool. This is also something that surprised me a little bit, like one of those things where it was surprising but also seems obvious after the fact. But in the world of sewing, I was a little bit surprised that we were building towards wool as being the sort of happy turning, like the crux of this book is this is true of many of these global history through the lens of object books. It's like people were doing a thing and everything was fine, and then colonialism. That's like the gist of people were making cool things and it was really nice, and then colonialism and then it got ruined. This is why we can't have nice things. But there is a lot in the world of like synthetics that she doesn't talk about here that for like eco-friendly, she does talk about the like the ecological implications of cotton in particular, like really bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
And to a lesser degree, but still linen also. There are a number of viscose fabrics that like that's a big, like when you're shopping for fabric and you're in like, as somebody who sews a lot of my own clothing, when you are looking for fabrics and you're like trying to look into the ethics, I guess, of your fabric purchases, there are a number of viscose fabrics that have like very heavy sort of green marketing around them. So it was surprising to me that not surprising, but also I'm like, no, I mean, I get it also. It was a little bit surprising to me to not have any of that brought up, and it also left me feeling very anxious because I'm like, well, how much then have I misunderstood something? Have I been sold something that is incorrect? I don't know. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know where we get started. Where did you have any like big takeaways, big surprises from reading this?
Yeah. Well, so like kind of talking about what you're saying in terms of it being a global history told through objects. I was like not fully expecting that. I mean, obviously you look at the table of contents and you're like, oh, I see what's happening. But I like didn't expect it to unfold in the way it did. And I don't always love those kind of global history through objects kind of things because I feel like they're so this is I'm saying very generally because there are people who do it well.
Yes.
Oftentimes they're so like narrowly focused and it feels almost like a coincidence. I don't know how to explain it, where it feels like a coincidence that you focused on something important, but obviously it's not because like you're the one who chose it. Like there's something weirdly almost like,
oh, yeah. No, I do know the framing often tends to be, isn't it surprising that you can tell the whole history of the world through the lens of straws or like whatever, like whatever the object.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think because of the way this one is done, where like the objects are broad, like linen is broad, cotton is broad. It's not like we're going to choose the specific silk shirt and tell the story of silk from there. It's very broadly silk. Yes. And I ended up liking it a lot. I liked the way that it meant that we get to see these recurring themes like the colonization, but also like a big common one is the devaluation of women's work, which like even manages to like somehow happen without colonization. Like that's like a constant theme in all of these like stories. And then just the way that kept coming up, and because of the structure of the materials, it meant that we got to see it coming up like sort of borderline chronologically, not fully, because like silk has this history that goes back super far. But I just liked the way that the chapters built on each other. I agree that the like twist of like wool is going to be not the savior, but like emblematic of something that like she even said, like she says that she's not even saying that there is a one solution kind of thing.
Yes.
But just the way that she uses wool in this context, I appreciated and was surprised by.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that she did a really good job of not doing the thing, the isn't it cute and fun that you can tell the whole history of like, I think she is actively telling the story of linen and cotton, like that's, you know, and I think like that is part of how it winds up, I don't know, being effective in the way that some of the other books in that sort of broad genre of history of the world through an object, like some of those don't work because they wind up feeling so sort of kitschy, like it's like a shtick rather than it feels like a gimmick, I guess, is it winds up feeling too much like a gimmick, and you can't really build like any strong sense of connection with a gimmick, but I think that she did a good job of laying out the like actual, you know, chronological connection, like, but like you said, between, you know, these fabrics and human history, and like how they caused different, like, there were so many like different directions that this went that I was not expecting it to go. I do think that there were a couple places where the broader socio-political context bogged it down a little bit. Like there was a lot of run up in which chapter was it? In the Silk, there was a lot of time where it came back around in a way that I was like, okay, this was satisfying, but we spent so much time, like it felt like we spent a lot of time away from fabric in the setup of like the Chinese context. Like there was a lot of like socio-political stuff that didn't on its surface have anything to do. And I was like, I understand that we need all of this, but there's a lot of information coming at me very quickly, and I'm not sure that I'm tracking all of it, and I'm not sure like where we're going. We got there in the end, but the extent of like sanctions on like detailing that like sanctions on China and like that I was just like, I don't know 100% where you're going with this, Sophie.
Yeah.
I thought we were talking about Silk. You lost me there. Yeah, I don't know. I am now feeling a little bit rambly myself. The history books are harder to talk about in this context too, because I don't feel like this book isn't making an argument in the way that it is a little bit, but I feel like a lot of the other books that we read have a much stronger point of view, like end game argument, than this one does. This one is like, this stuff happened, and I'm like, yes, Sophie, this stuff did happen. I didn't know that it happened, but now I do know that it happened, and that's great.
Interesting, because I think, especially with the way the book was structured, part of the reason why I liked it is because I felt like it actually had a really strong point of view, and especially I felt like what I was thinking about this a lot in the context of is like a lot of the conversations I see around sustainability and labor and fashion are focused on the sweatshops and on the making of the garments themselves,
right?
And like. And so I've heard people talk about this in the context of like sewing, where it's like, oh, if you sew for yourself, you'll solve all these problems. And people have to be like, no, because the fabric didn't just like emerge from somewhere. Like it didn't like just like poof into being. It like was made and was like, that's actually like a core thing. And so I felt like a lot of what this book did for me was like kind of get to the fundamentals, like get to just like the actual basics of what is going into clothing. It was interesting too, because I feel like on TikTok, I'll get like these TikTokers who like do a great job of explaining like how to look at clothing and how to kind of assess the quality of clothing, so that like you can make better choices, so that you can purchase something that will be better quality and last longer and everything. But even still, with them explaining it really well, I just don't know enough about fabric, where I'm kind of like almost like, just give me a formula, just tell me what's good, right? And I felt like a lot of what this book was not necessarily giving that specific knowledge. Like it can't really do that in the scope of what it's doing. But I felt like it was really good for helping me to understand better about why fabric is important. Like I know that sounds so silly, because like obviously fabric is important, but I don't like know enough about fabric to explain is that we're looking for like what makes fabric unsustainable, or what makes certain types of fabric so like dangerous to handle or bad, like just like on a simple basis, just like bad.
That's really interesting. And I think you're right. The book not having a point of view was that was incorrect phrasing on my part. I take it back. But also hearing you say all of that is interesting too, because it makes me feel a little bit like I was making the mistake of being like, this book has my own point of view. And therefore it has no point of view. You know?
Yeah. Like not hearing an accent or something.
Yes. 100%. This book has my accent, so like this book doesn't have an accent. So that's really interesting. I was thinking about this book a lot in terms in relation to Consumed, obviously. I think that's kind of the obvious of all the things This is now our third book about fashion. Look at us go.
Yeah,
we are now fashion influencers.
We're on a roll. Yeah.
But it feels like a strong companion to this. This feels like, for people who have no sort of strong, have like, you know, like pretty like average level of interest in involvement, whatever, in fashion, like Consumed is one of the books that like I genuinely would put in the hands of like anybody. Like that's like a would strongly recommend. I think that most people could benefit from reading it, but like, it's I would start there. And then I would be like, once you have read that, then come that, like, this feels like book 2 in this in that series almost, you know. Like it's like I think that like they're touching on a lot of the same things, but I think that this is taking a somewhat more esoteric approach to the topic. Like not that I think that the language or anything about this is inaccessible, but I think about like so much of Consumed is like she takes time out every couple chapters to like ask you questions. Like it's explicitly saying, what do you do about this? Like what are these habits? What is this? Like think, you know, like get very introspective in that way. And this is like, okay, if you want to keep going,
for sure. Yeah, it's also I was just coming back to that point you made earlier about the fact that she doesn't really talk about at all about like green labeling and fashion. And it's really interesting because she talks a lot about the environmental impact of fashion, and like of a lot of these, like cotton, it's a big one. I think in the synthetics, it's also like a big part of that conversation when she's talking about dyes and stuff as well. And so in some ways, like I wish there had been something, but I also get it because I feel like that is something that's almost unresolved and is like an ongoing thing. But because she does like use, like, one of the things I liked is when she was talking about, I forget which chapter it was in. It must have been in the synthetics, where kind of like about like the who was the actress? Was it?
Melanie Griffith, like, and the
Melanie Griffith. And like having her kind of like,
maybe not Melanie Griffith. It's not Melanie Griffith. It wasn't her, but I know what you're talking about. It was a
and then before that, also talking about like this idea of like basically what she's saying is like the girl bossification, like the girl boss feminism kind of thing. She's using the more academic terms for it, but that being like a part of feminism in this century, but also like having it be so like narrow in who it applies to and all that stuff. So like there's something about the fact that stuff was in there, and then we didn't get to like really engage with sustainable marketing. That I was like, oh, that would have been interesting. But also maybe that's just like also so much.
I don't think that you could. That would have been like there would have been no way to have done that in the space. Like that would have been another like 100 pages of the book in order to do that, the justice that the rest of this got. I appreciate, I don't know. I think especially because like you said, it is so unresolved. Like there are so many pieces of it where you're relying on, like we are relying on incomplete information, and like the I forget what it's called now, but the like in the synthetics, but like the labor like agreements that basically every non-American manufacturer has agreed to like uphold the labor standards, and like, and even within that basically saying like, yes, and they made their own separate little agreement that basically says they're accountable to nothing. And so, and like that is how much of the like green labeling works anyway. Like it's more of the same, where like the standards are garbage, and also there's not a ton more to say than she did like get into some of the specifics of basically like clothing manufacturer. It's like something like 10% of like the global like water supply. Like it's nutty. It's like bonkers how much. Here it is. Sorry, not water. I don't know why I said water. Global carbon emissions. Textile production is one of the most energy-intensive industries there is, responsible for 1/10 of all global carbon emissions. Like, that's insane. Like, when you in the grand scope of like industries. So I don't know. Like, the acknowledgement of the environmental impact is there. I don't know what else she could have done without adding a truly bonkers additional page count here.
Yeah. I forget what there was another stat. I forgot if it was water or energy or something, but it was just like about how much resources go into a single pair of jeans that I was just like, oh, like I need to change the way I think about jeans. Like, I remember just like that single like stat. And like, obviously, like single stats are just like, that is sort of the point of them, is to like shock and awe you. So like, I would love to see that fully like laid out, but it was like, oh, okay, right, shopping.
It's well, and yes, all of the stuff about it's interesting because there's the pieces of this that are like, there were things like that are definitely in like shit that I am thinking about all the time already. So again, this comes back to my sense of like, I don't know what to say here, because I just feel like I got a little bit more context for stuff that, like, a lot of this was stuff that I did, like the rapid decline in denim, like in like denim production in the US, like that is a thing that I know a ton about. So like, so some of this is like hard for me to contextualize how this reads for anybody who isn't me, right? Like I know I know what I brought into this, and I don't know what you know what I mean. Don't know how to get out of my own head in that respect. The whole export processing zones chapter is the last chapter before she gets into wool, which is like the tide. There's a really lovely like arc to this, there's a this sort of emotional arc that she takes you on, where it peaks or plummets, I guess, emotionally when you really hit rock bottom in this export processing zones chapter. That's the chapter with the most important feature of the American alliance is that it legally liberates American brands from ever being held accountable. It's in that chapter. There's also a thing I wrote. She's talking about how like conditions are like, there's like a special sort of class of visa in which people are coming in on conditions that are functionally slavery. In amongst all of that, there was also a thing that I underlined because I was like, a lot of these other things are like very, very gross human rights abuses very clearly. And then also tucked in there, like it almost feels innocuous in surrounded by all of the like actual human rights abuses. But she's talking about how Ann Taylor rolled out an Ann Taylor allocation system, or Atlas, to monitor each employee's sales per hour and dollars per transaction. With this data, the most productive employees could be made to work during the busiest hours, and unproductive salespeople would see their hours cut. The name was important, one executive said, because it gave a personality to the system, so employees hate the system and not us. And there's just, I don't know why. I was like, I realized that everything around this is actually even darker than this, but for some reason, like this, there's just something so capitalist hellscape.
The employees can hate both.
I am capable of hating you and your system. Watch me. So this chapter is really it's a rough one. And then it's like, and then she's like, and then some people have sheep, and then I went and hung out with some people and their sheep, and it's okay. I really want to go to Woolfest. I went to look up I was like, I want to go. That sounds like a great time. Hang out with a bunch of old ladies who love wool. That sounds like a blast to me.
Yeah. One of my favorite chapters, which is like not about the bleakness of manufacturing, but I just really loved it because I love this kind of like fashion history stuff, is from the silk section, the costume drama, which sort of then feeds into the rise of mass fashion. Like that's sort of the context that it's giving. I really enjoyed
costume drama is the best chapter for sure. Or it's the most fun chapter.
Export
processing zones is
the most important one.
Export processing zones is the most important chapter. But costume drama, an absolute blast. And
so basically like for people who haven't read the book, the costume drama chapter is basically about how France became fashion place, the fashion whatever you would call it, and basically how it's all was it Louis the 14th basically was like, I'm gonna make clothes super important in my court, and that created like kind of a whole chain of effect or a whole set of effects that just created, I don't know, couture, created like a lot of different views of like tailoring versus couture, sewing. That was like a really interesting distinction, like cutting versus sewing.
It's also the most like information dense in terms of fashion, like the most concentrated, partially because that chapter was still doing a lot of the same like big like geopolitical work that the other chapters were. It's just that that chapter benefited from the fact that like France was actively using fashion as a geopolitical force in like a very distinct way that like doesn't have a clear she didn't get to write any other chapters like that chapter couldn't have been written about none of the other chapters could have been written that way because nobody else did it quite like that. There's a bit too where I forget who, but some American founding father was like, that's the French will like tax us and all of Europe because you can't come to Paris and wear your garbage clothes from your home country. You'll look like a loser. So if you come to Paris, you're gonna have to spend a fuck ton of money buying Parisian clothing so that you don't look like a big loser.
But also then the weird way, like that was like also where she talked about like men's clothing becoming increasingly boring, and just like that kind of dynamic was fascinating. Like not like that specific era, like I don't know, all of these things always just like fade into other trends, like everything is cycles, everything comes around again, but that was like the Great Renunciation, who's like what it was called, where like just like the down, like the effects of just like how things keep building on each other just like eventually led to also fashion for men becoming boring.
Yes. Very sad for men. That's unfortunate. You really lost out.
They were wearing red high heels for a time,
I loved that.
They had it all.
The it's really you should be upset about what you've lost, men. This is like the idea of like the fashion season being born too, because he was just like, no, from this day on, now it's time for you to wear a different fabric. That's it. That's the deal. Because I fucking said so. And that's how I'm exerting my weird tyrannical power, is by telling everybody to wear a different fabric now. Truly bonkers. But
it reminded, like, this chapter in the Rise of Mass Fashion
was the founding father who said the thing. I found that.
Those two chapters reminded me so much of Battle of Versailles.
Yes.
Just thinking about like that like how much of the story was about the shift from French like fashion to American mass market fashion. There were some parts where she was talking about like how like designers, like put their name on, like you could purchase the pattern and all of this stuff. And I know. I read this. I got this.
I know about that stuff. I also really enjoyed, she mentions, she talks about Elsa Chaparrali a little bit, but my favorite part of her mentioning Elsa Chaparrali is specifically that she included a parenthetical dig at Chanel. Coco Chanel. She's like,
everyone needs to always remember that Chanel was a Nazi. Like you get like, It baffles me that she is somehow like still iconic in any way.
Yeah. It was incredible. It was incredible because she literally, she wasn't talking about Chanel. Like that was the thing that was so great, is that it's like several paragraphs about Chaparrali, and then she manages to include, there's no discussion of Chanel whatsoever, except to be like, Chaparrali was great, and unlike Coco fucking Chanel, not a Nazi. Really beautiful. I loved it. Incredible. Yes, you're right. We should always remind people that.
Yeah. There's also there's like a section in the Rise of Mass Fashion that I like kept underlining, where she's talking about, it's related to the Chaparrali, the difference between like how we framed mass production of clothes in America versus at the time, like Cold War era, mass production of clothes in Russia, or like how Americans framed both and kept them, somehow were thought of them as different, where like somehow in Russia that was like a representation of let's see, it was like the idea of 40 million women in the same dress would have been consistent with American ideas of communist Russia. Right. In the West, mass production of dresses was just as real, but the language of advertising insisted instead that the garment was a singularity, like the woman who wore it. Yes. And that was like fascinating, like to me, because like again, like thinking about then what clothes look like, fashion and clothing, and how people talk about it today, where like we talk about fashion as such like an individualistic thing, but especially now, like with TikTok and Instagram and everything, like there are these clothes that just become so uniform, and it's not just like there's a trend, it's like individual items that like people will wear, like seek out.
Yes. Well, and related to that too, like somewhere within a couple pages of that too, she's talking about how in a lot of ways, like the mass production of fashion allowed people to evade some like difficult conversations about class, because people who were poor could dress like they were not, and like it meant that you didn't have to. It was really interesting phrasing, because it was not something that I would have thought about, but basically like what she's getting at is, before this moment in time, poverty was like very obvious, like it was very clear, and one of the things that the mass production of fashion did was allow poverty to be hidden in a way that made it more comfortable for people to do nothing about it, basically. And to pretend that, like, you know, to sort of collapse this idea of dressing the part with like the sort of like bootstrap mentality too, of like, well, if you just dress yourself real nice, then you will go get this job and you'll have massive social mobility or whatever. But like, that's not how it works.
Because that was like also a thing that I was thinking about in terms of like when fashion blogs became a thing, like in the early internet days, and like it's only continued since then. There was this idea that like fashion was being democratized, like because it wasn't just magazines who are now talking about fashion to like a wide audience. It was like actually like just people talking about the clothes that they were buying, and you know, they're not necessarily like, a lot of them are probably wealthy, but like they're still just like not like people. So there's that sense of it being democratized, but like whether or not that's actually the case is something that I always like keep like thinking about, because I mean, deciding whether or not it is the case depends on how you're going to define democratization of fashion. So like that's like kind of arbitrary. It's not like worth a lot to argue that unless you're going to really dive into like how you're defining that. But it's just really fascinating to me in the context of this chapter, where it's like both something where like, like it's more available, but like in like the full effect is still not necessarily like justice or fairness or equality. It's and that's something she talked about later too. I think it's in the export chapter, but like just like the way that fashion actually ends up making us confront these like very big questions of like, what do we think of in terms of equality? What do we think is an acceptable amount of inequality? Like, what should it look like for like people to be able to survive? Like all of that stuff is really rooted in fashion, and it's like a constant question.
Mm-hmm. And the idea, the democratization, like you're increasing access to the product. Sure, like you said, even that is already has like there's some, but let's say we accept that premise. You are the person on the other end of that, like their life has gotten worse. Like that is just like point blank. And
did we talk about the strawberry dress in Consumed? I can't remember if we talked about that.
We did.
This like sounds familiar because like this is the thing that like that feels like the shining example of it, of like the internet made this dress very popular and got it to a point where this dress that was like very beautifully designed and like was expensive because it's made with like a lot of care for the people who are making it. It then got ripped off and like spurred all these arguments about whether or not like it's elitist to demand this amount of money, to say that like you are exploiting people if you were buying the copycat version, like all of this stuff.
That's very, that we must have talked about that in Consumed too, because like that is like that's like the heart and soul of the argument too of Consumed, is basically like your and this is I guess some of this is Consumed, some of this is also just that like I follow Asia Barber on Twitter, and so I can't part of me is like how much of this is stuff that I read in the book and how much of this is her Twitter that I'm referencing now, but but this is like something that she talks about all the time, is that like this idea of what it means to be poor in like the US, like the people who are complaining about this shit, the people who are insisting, anybody American in particular who is complaining that like it is elitist to demand that much money for a dress is either intentionally or not, but is saying that like it is absolutely okay for somebody around the world to be fucked over in a way that is incomprehensible to me. Like to like there's no sense of scale there. And like there's a, I don't know. I recognize that I am also not like, I don't know, my own positionality here, my own like wealth and,
I mean, I'm wearing like an H&M sweater. Like I'm like, you know, like I feel like at the end of the day, all of our clothes are fabrics or whatever, implicate us. So like I don't,
my thing is, I guess my thing is more, I am speaking from a position, I'm less concerned about that piece than I am about the sense of like my own, like I recognize that I am in a position where I can afford to spend $300 on a dress if I really wanted to. Like I don't, because I like making my own clothes. Like that's really the reason that I wouldn't. But like I have, like I have spent that much money on a dress before, and it's not like an inconceivable or impossible thing for me to do. So like that's the piece of it where I'm like, okay, I recognize the difference. However, it's also like the saying that you are owed something that requires somebody else to suffer for you to have is like, it's fucking sick. Like it's sick. Like there's no, I don't know.
There's this Instagram, I guess influencer / stylist that I follow who I have like very mixed feelings about. And part of it is I feel like she's like very upfront. Like people have asked like, why don't you talk about sustainability? And she's like, I just don't. I'm not a sustainability fashion person. And so I actually appreciate that more than like the people who sort of like do the half-assed like H&M put out this new collection. This is good. We're going to save the environment kind of thing. Right? Like I appreciate that. But the other thing that I have like the mixed feelings about, where it's like, she'll sometimes frame like how she talks about clothes. Like a lot of what she does is just like really break down trends. And I think she's pretty good at it, which is why I like follow her. But the thing that I find like very frustrating is that sort of like framing that I think a lot of people do when we talk about fashion, especially like in like, because this like affects women, is talking about it in the context of like, this is about appreciating something that women get put down for a lot, like talking about fashion, taking it seriously. And so there's like, part of me like really understands that. I think that's like super real. Like, I think we like, and especially in the context of who our audience is, are usually like, you know, moms or like people who like just had to dedicate a lot of their lives to something where like taking care of themselves is a little bit like maybe been put on the back burner. Like a lot of her content is framed around like how do you like kind of rediscover yourself in the context of like actually of fashion. So I appreciate all that, but it's like something that I just always think about too with like a lot of queasiness, because it's just like so it's so driven by buying stuff. And I mean I say that as someone who like likes clothes and buys clothes and I do that too, right? Like I feel very stumbly right now because like that's all I can say. It's like I do it too. But there's something about like not fully then engaging with it, like with the idea that like our sense of like identity and whatever is like still being built in part of this bigger system that I don't know, because I sometimes, like I said, like I appreciate that at least with the sustainability stuff, she's like, whatever, you guys, I like that's not who I am. I don't know it, so we're just not doing it. Like where I'm like sometimes like maybe I better just be like honest about the fact that you just like want to buy stuff. But yeah, sorry, I forgot why I was originally talking about this, but this is the thing I kept thinking about with this book. Because it's one of the things she talked about is that disconnect. Yeah.
I feel a certain uneasiness around that, to me, particularly if you're talking about an influencer, mainly because at that point you're not talking about somebody making individual choices. You're talking about somebody giving a platform to choices. So I don't know, man. I don't know how much like sympathy I can extend to the idea of just like, oh, this isn't something, because I don't know. I mean. I will say I do appreciate, and something like this book in sort of the conclusion kind of talks about is like dressing is an individual act, but it's also a deeply social one. She talks about how the conclusion is basically like, listen, there's a lot. There are many things that are broken and bad, and they're broken and bad in so many different ways that maybe it's overwhelming, and no, you, one individual person, are not going to be able to go fix all of the ways that this is broken and bad, but like maybe you can make one better choice. Like maybe you can just start and like that sort of that kind of, that's like the basic tone of like the conclusion that she draws is like, you know, where there, and like that there are communities that are trying to make this set of choices better or easier, or like create these new options or whatever, which I don't know, I do appreciate. I'm like, I get frustrated. To me, I don't know, if you're talking about fashion and the textile industry is producing 1/10 of all global emissions, like, I don't know, maybe I have a little bit of a problem with you saying, I don't know. I mean, I that being said, I am also sympathetic to the fact that it is complicated and it is actually really fucking difficult to track, like in such a way that even people, like, even when you are like researching it, when you're trying to figure it out, like, it's not fucking clear. It is not like the supply chains are obfuscated on purpose. Like nobody wants it to be easy for you to see where this shit came from. I don't know. I love, this is a total tangent, but there's a bit where she's talking about getting a shirt tailored and how how like cool it was to think about the ingredients of a shirt, and how weird it was that she'd never thought about the ingredients of a shirt, and how like she likened that to the idea of like as if you only ever went to eat at restaurants and like never I don't know, I just as somebody who probably has more the opposite problem, I don't fucking know. I would love to just eat at restaurants and never think about I think a lot about how my shirt, the recipe for my shirt, but I don't want to think about the recipe for my sandwich. I just want a sandwich. Thank you.
I will say, I do want to make a recommendation though, then, for anyone who's interested in creators. I'm trying to pull up the name of this person. So there's this TikToker who I just started watching recently called Devin Rule, DEVONRULE. And so she like used to work in the fashion industry. She calls herself a fashion industry dropout, but she like she did this like series recently about talking about like fabric and materials and kind of like what to look like, and she talks a lot about sustainability as well and kind of how she sees that like happening in the industry. So I really liked her stuff. I feel like it's pretty thoughtful in terms of how she talks about both style and consumption. So I will suggest that to anyone who's like interested in like keeping up with the content, or keeping up with this kind of topic, because I like her content.
That's cool. That's really fun. This is not actually like a meaningful rec, really, but part of why I think I got so excited about the Elsa Chaparrali stuff is the current creative director of Chaparrali, the brand. I actually don't even know his last name. I know his name is my brother Daniel, because there's is a man. The creative director is a man named Daniel, and his sister is on TikTok, and he like designed her wedding dress, and then like because she had talked about him and her wedding dress a bunch, like the company was like, this is like a fun little bit, right? So they like flew her out to Paris and had her just film all these TikToks of her like going, walking around like their offices, and then there was a whole exhibit at the Louvre. A lot of fun, really truly delightful. Highly recommend. Just look up the creative director of Chaparrali, whose name is Daniel, and then his sister. She's on TikTok.
Thinking about that like also makes me think about I don't know if this is actually related, but this is where my brain jumped to.
Let's go.
I feel like a common theme in this book is people not valuing fabric or fashion history. And that made me think a lot about how upset people got with Kim Kardashian wearing Marilyn Monroe's dress at the Met Gala. And I had like mixed feelings about that response, but overall I feel like also you kind of just have to be sympathetic to fashion historians who are just like, ultimately this is because our field is like not valued. Like if our field was valued, I would be able to like convey to you guys a better way of handling this dress, which is to probably put it on a
most fashion historians, the most common take that I saw on that too wasn't even like, oh, Kim Kardashian. It was like, fucking the museum where it was kept. Like that's who they were all
Ripley's.
Thank you. Yes, Ripley's. I was like, it's somewhere silly.
Because I watched the Kardashians. I saw this unfold again this past year because I kept up with season 2. So I was like reliving it. Like for some reason when it all happened, I was like, okay, this is annoying, like that she did this, but like I feel like outraged out, so I couldn't like muster up. But then like watching it again, I was like, right, this is shitty. Like this sucks. But like ultimately the real issue is that was on the museum though. Like the museum shouldn't have allowed to happen in the first. Like it's not like, I mean, I'm not out here trying to defend Kim Kardashian. Fuck Kim Kardashian. However, it was not her responsibility to know that this was inappropriate. It was the museum's responsibility to care about like the artifact, like to take seriously the artifact in their care and to take care of the artifact in their care. That is anyway. Yeah, but to your point, that it's like it's all of that happens in the first place because of the way in which fashion history is like not regarded as anything, and there is certainly something very gendered in that, like undeniably that's the case. So I'm curious because like you like have been in the sewing world now for like a decent amount, so like I assume you've like learned a lot. Like were there things about fabric that I guess like surprised you, or like what was like the biggest thing or interesting, or I don't know, is there anything about fabric for you, or like what did it look like to learn about fabric?
Interesting.
From your own experience or from this book?
Oh, interesting. I was thinking that you meant from the book. I mean, I think that just like I would say that my understanding of fabric in general is still like early stages. Like I've gotten to the place now where I have a pretty good understanding of like what different fabrics are. Actually, when I first started sewing, I had a notebook where I was like recording whenever I would order, because I ordered all I was mostly, I started sewing shortly before the pandemic started. And so like most of my fabric purchases in the beginning were online orders. Couldn't go into a store. So I was ordering fabric, but then I would write down all of the, like whatever the thing online was. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, tragic. Here we go. I'm back in fewer.
It's like a metaphor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway. I don't know what I was saying. Oh, fabric. Oh, I was writing down what like fabric content. So like I would order something and be like, oh, okay, that looks pretty. But then I would write down like, you know, like what it said online, which it would be like, okay, this is 60% cotton, 40% rayon, or something like that, like what the blend breakdown was, and then if they listed like the weight, whatever. Got to a point where like I can read all of that stuff, and I'm like, I know what that, like I have a good sense of how heavy this is going to be, how it's going to feel, like what it's going to be like to work with or whatever.
Interesting.
I don't know where I was going with that as an answer to your question. Because I don't, just in general, that I feel like I still have like, I don't know, I still have plenty more to learn. I don't know, like I'm just now getting to that place where I feel like I have a really good, I have a good sense of like what to expect. I can read about a fabric and have a good sense of what it will feel like and how it will handle based on the fiber content and like weight. Those two things are the biggies to get written down. I'm always having to Google warp and weft. So I appreciated her discussion of that. Like I understand the basic premise, but it's also like in sort of like sewing, you know, whatever, in like discussions, it matters like how you're positioning the fabric. I actually have a dress that I fucking love that I never wear because I wasn't paying attention to how I was positioning the pattern pieces. And basically like she explains how warp and weft work, right? Like that it's the part of the fabric is being pulled very, very taut, and then there's there's the other side where it's like being woven through. Do you like this? This is my visual representation of how fabric comes together. And the pattern pieces, like for the shoulder, for the arm, it matters which, for like a woven fabric, like which way which way I cut it, and I cut it incorrectly, so there's just like no give whatsoever at the shoulders. Like I can't I just like can't move my arms. It's a very beautiful dress for me to stand still in. It's a great tragedy. And like, but I will say I made that mistake. Like I made this dress and I was like, I don't know what happened, I don't know why this dress is like this, I must, like, maybe the fabric is bad, whatever. It was like another year before I connected. Like I like was working on something else entirely, and I was like playing with, like, you can see it too. What do I have here? I don't know if I have any. Actually, this linen. This is 100% linen, and linen is actually really great for this. Where like, so it's a woven fabric, so it has no stretch. If I pull it this way versus if I pull it. Okay. So this way, there's like all it can do is go like that. Whereas this way, it like slides, like you can see it sort of sliding more, you know? Anyway, linen is like is really great for seeing like the difference between, even though the fabric, it's like technically has like no stretch, there is one way that it has like a weird amount of give and another way that it doesn't. And I was cutting something else entirely, and I was like, oh, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong with my dress. I know. I mean, I don't know it because I can't go back and see how I cut it, but I know it. Like I know, I know that that's what I did with those fucking shoulders of my sad dress I can't wear. Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question. I completely lost the plot once my camera turned off.
No, because I feel like fabric is like the thing that keeps me from being able to learn sewing. Well, that and like my like complete impatience. Like I like need to learn how to take measurements, all that stuff, and then instead I'm just like, I'm just gonna put these pieces together and see what happens.
I hate whenever anything has a hand sewing step. That's for precisely that reason. This is my struggle. Like pants, when you got most of the pants, like it's like you have to hand sew the waistband at the end, and I'm like, ugh. Every pants are basically done from like a month and a half ago, but they're not done because I have to hand sew the waistband down.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, the thing that, sorry, you were saying the thing that keeps you from sewing.
Yeah, well, like, I feel like I read about, like, fabric because I'm like, okay, if I learn about fabric, I'll finally be able to sew. But I try to read it, and I just, like, find it so technical and confusing.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I feel like I want to take a class, because I feel like if I take a class and, like, have someone, like, demonstrate, like, kind of like you were showing, I'm like, oh, okay, that, like, makes more sense. But I just, like, on my own, I left to my own devices.
Yeah.
Turns out I made a dress that, like, mostly, I, like, kind of Frankenstein some patterns together, and I was like, I like the way it looks, except that it's like I chose a fabric that's way too heavy, and so I put it on, and it's just like the whole dress is like falling, and like I was like, yeah, I should have seen that one. I should have realized this was stupid. But
I mean, that's the only way that I learn. Like, I don't know. I don't think that even taking a class, like, I think for me, like, everybody is different, I guess. But like for me, that was the process. Like, I just had to go and make stupid mistakes over and over again before I was like, oh, I've learned a thing.
Yeah, I think I actually made a mistake too. Like, I was like, this fabric is stretchy. It's going to be great. I'm going to be able to make this dress that stretches out really nicely. And then I did it the wrong direction. And so, like, the top was, like, kind of like a tight, more corset-y, not corset, but, like, tight kind of top. And, like, I tried to put it on, and I was stuck. Well, that's what happens when you cut your pieces in a stupid direction.
See that I've made a mistake here. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. The dress is like an entire testament to my, like, lack of patience.
The rush.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else that we wanted to touch on with this? This is last call that we got some. My favorite thing in the chat is I've been informed that there is a pretty large sheep and wool festival in New York. I also saw one in Kentucky. When I first typed Wool Fest in, it was like Kentucky, and I was like, no, she's definitely not in Kentucky. That's not the thing. That's not where that's not where she is. So it took me a second to find the thing where she was, but apparently I can go to Wolf. I can do a global tour of Wool Fests, maybe.
Yeah.
New goal. Hit a Wool Fest in every time zone, maybe. That's probably not actually possible, but it's fine. Collect many Wool Fest attendances, Wool Fest badges. Maybe that can be my.
Have you done, like, wool stuff before?
I have a coat that is hilarious because I made the arms too big. It is so fucking heavy. It's cute. I just have to, like, roll the sleeves a little bit because they're way too long. I'm actually about to make another black wool coat. Testing a pattern. I'm excited about that. Actually, the dress that I was just saying that I can't wear, I have another one like it that is made of, like, a wool suiting fabric. But, like, even wool is, like, there's a range of, so, like, I have, like, some, like, very thick wool coating for the coat that I made, the one that I'm about to make. But then, like, my wool dress is, like, much thinner, like way thinner. So it's like a brown herringbone suiting fabric that I used to make a dress, and it's pretty fun. So I'll have to get my wool wardrobe up before I go to Wool Fest so that I can be cool at Wool Fest. Be the envy of all the grandmas at Wool Fest.
Yeah. Did you like the book?
I loved this book. I really loved this book. I feel like that's maybe also part of why I have a hard time talking about it, because I just really loved it. And I feel like I got a lot out of it, and I feel like I will definitely read it again. I tabbed a few things that were just, like, not even, like, discussion-y things, but they were, like, there was something fashion-y that I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Early on in the book, she talks about funerary rags. They exhumed some funerary rags, and they discovered a meticulously crafted shirt with an elaborate system they weren't funerary rags. That was the thing. What it actually was a meticulously crafted shirt with an elaborate system of pleats that allowed its wearer to move their limbs comfortably while still enjoying a fitted silhouette. I tabbed that mostly because I was like, I want to go, I like can't, I like want to see it. I want to understand like what is happening there. That's my favorite thing.
Kept thinking,
go ahead. No. That's my favorite thing about learning to sew is that now when I'm like watching, it's all the time when I'm like watching TV or like movies or something like that, I will see somebody wearing something and I get a little distracted because I'm like trying to parse out how that came together. How did you do that? What's going on there? What are the attachment points? How does that work? Sometimes the answer is they are sewn into it. When I'm really looking at it like this is not making any sense, it's because it doesn't make sense for a normal human being. It's because you don't have a team of people to sew you into your clothing. So womp womp.
But I should.
I should.
Like Cinderella style, just like a bunch of birds throwing me every morning into my clothing. I also love this book, and I think I kept thinking about too is how much I wish it was like a little mini series or something, because there were so many descriptions where I was like, I want to see the clothing, I want to see what that looks like, and then when she's talking about the technology and all that stuff, it's like I want to see it. I feel like this would be such a good like
docuseries. Yes, I big agree. I want this docuseries. Maybe
like my only complaint about the book is like if they had just had pictures in here, that's like the only thing missing. But otherwise,
pitch this to Hank. This is a new Complexly show. We're gonna turn this into a mini series. I was
gonna say if anyone's watching who can do this, but Nicole, if you're watching, you can do this.
I might know a guy.
Hank doesn't have enough to do.
No,
we gotta give him more.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody at the company will be fine when I say, listen, I just need $250,000 and like 8 months to turn this book into a YouTube series. It'll be great. It'll be so great.
I need to go to India. I need to go to China.
Yeah.
I need to go
I actually probably I wasn't when I threw that number out there. I'm going to be real with you. I wasn't factoring in. I'm going to need. It'll be more like $500,000 that I need. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Anyway, well, cool. Let's talk about what we're doing next.
Yeah. So next month we are moving it up to the first weekend of February, just for next month, just for scheduling's sake. So we will be doing Nonfiction Book Club on my channel on February 4th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the book we will be talking about is How Far the Light Reaches: A Life in 10 Sea Creatures by Sabrina Imbler. I am very excited to read this. This came out pretty recently. I believe it's an essay collection. So sort of actually very similar to Virology in that I think it's like a kind of personal / scientific essay collection. So it'll be interesting to read to see how it compares to Virology and also to see how it stands on its own as well. To be completely honest, I think Mari posted about it on Twitter and I was like, I want to read that book. Like I've been wanting to read it. So let's do that one.
Let's go.
That was the decision process. I just messaged Nicole. I was like, hey, Mari has she needs to like it. So let's do it.
Let's go.
Yeah.
She had literally just been talking to you about it like earlier that day too when you suggested it. So
yeah, it's just all connected.
Yes.
So yeah, sometimes we think really long and hard, and sometimes we're just like, this is a book I've been wanting to read, I guess, and now's a good time to do it.
Yes. We also already picked the book after that by me sending her a picture. I sent Deboki a picture. I was like, here's 3 books I own. Did you want to read any of these 3 books I own? So, sometimes we plan a lot and sometimes we just vibe it out. So anyway, well,
most of the time we vibe it out.
Okay, you know what? Once upon a time we planned a lot. In the beginning, when we started this, we planned a lot, and then that was hard, and so we stopped planning a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us. Yes. For whatever.
We'll see you next month.
And we'll see you next month. Bye.